Washington, D.C. is as mysterious as it is majestic, but behind the marble facade hide symbols and designs that speak to a darker plan. Are these simply nods to the past, or is there more to them than meets the eye? Today we'll look at the history, layout, and symbols found throughout Washington's streets to uncover the meaning behind them and the sinister purpose hiding in the shadows. At the founding of America, one secret society put their mark on this nation, and with that mark, their pagan-influenced beliefs became intertwined with America's future, thus setting the battleground for the continuing fight between godly principles and the occult schemes that were put in motion. And helping us understand these symbols and beliefs is my friend and prolific author, Dr. Thomas Horn. Thank you for being with me.
Great to be here, Jimmy.
You bet. Since the construction of the U.S. Capitol, there have been hidden in plain sight secret emblems and pagan references that have largely gone unnoticed by the majority of Americans. What are their purpose? And why do we even see their influence in the layout and building designs of the city? Today, we're taking a look at the secret symbols of Washington, D.C. to reveal the truth. But before we get to that, Tom, take us through how the plan for the city came about in the first place.
Yeah, and by the way, in the conclusion of the first part in this special series, you made a fascinating point that I just want to repeat here. And that is that despite the fact that there were occultists in early America, Freemasons, who had a plan for where this nation would go, it became a Christian nation in spite of all of that because of the preachers.
Right.
And so the Pilgrims, the Puritans, signing on to the Mayflower Compact, we dedicate our lives to reaching this new world with the gospel. And it reminded me very much of what had happened in the New Testament, where 12 disciples of Jesus, right, they're being persecuted by the Romans, they're being thrown into prison, you aren't going to speak anymore. It says they came out of prison rejoicing in what great things God counted them worthy to suffer. Within 150 years, nobody said, great is the goddess Diana, right? The world had been turned upside down. What does that tell us? It tells us that as we're examining in this two-part series, part of American history, there were those who were devoted to an occult democracy, an occult scheme. And yet, for a while at least, we became a Christian nation. Maybe we can become a Christian nation again. And certainly that would be our prayer. So I wanted to say that because now we're going to talk about what's called the most approved plan. Now, anybody that wants to verify what I'm going to say now for themselves can. And they will find numerous official U.S. government websites that tell the most fascinating story about after the signing of the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson and actually later on George Washington. The two of them were very friendly with each other early. Later on, they kind of became divided. But they decided to host a contest. And they advertised across America, in France, in Europe, for what architectural firm could design the U.S. capital city. Brand new nation, now we're going to build a capital city. And the promise was that whoever won that contest, well, they're going to get they're going to get engineering grants and contracts and plus just the bragging rights of being, the company that designed the new U.S. Capitol. But something happened. At the end of the day, according to the official U.S. government website, Thomas Jefferson rejected all of the plans that had been submitted. Why? It tells us why. It says because he wanted the U.S. capital city based on the old Roman pantheon and dedicated to all pagan gods under Jupiter, the Greco-Roman gods. Now, that's our own official U.S. government website,
Wow.
which confirms everything we talked about in part one of this series. As a matter of fact, the term Capitol Hill comes from the old Roman Capitoline Hill, where the temple to Jupiter stood. So that's exactly what they wanted, and that's exactly what they built, and that's the reason why when you visit the U.S. Capitol, you're surrounded by all of this stuff. And if you're a Christian, you're saying, wait, I thought we were founded as a Christian country. Where's Jesus and God the Father and Michael the Archangel? And what are all these strange looking characters?
Well, it's well documented that Thomas Jefferson was a deist. He did not believe in a personal God. He believed that there was a creator, but that creator was basically agnostic as to the affairs of men. And so he had a plan from the very beginning. So, talk about in the layout of Washington, D.C., because in the last part of this program, the first part of this series, we talked about the resurrection of Osiris. So talk about how the city of Washington is laid out related to the resurrection of Osiris.
Okay, so first of all, let's talk about the U.S. Capitol Dome. This is like one of there is a White House, but actually the Capitol is more important in terms of the everyday business, the inauguration of presidents, the laying in state of presidents, all of that. So the U.S. Capitol Dome has been called a temple. Thomas Jefferson was one of the first ones who actually referred to it as the first and only real temple in America. So it was a religious structure in his mind. Well, when you walk inside the U.S. Capitol Dome, where I've been many times, and you walk inside the rotunda and you look up, what is it that you see, right? High overhead, you see the famous 4,664 square foot painting by the Italian painter Constantino Brumidi. It's called the Apotheosis of Washington. Apotheosis means to become a god. So, as you look at Washington rising in to this heaven, what god is he supposedly becoming? Well, numerous Freemasons and then famous, like the playwright Walt Whitman, the famous American poet, he wrote numerous articles on how Washington is becoming the Osiris of the afterlife. That's only part of the story. So he is becoming Osiris, the same God that is in the symbolism on the Great Seal of the United States, that ultimately takes up his residence in the lower world as the God of the dead, the God of Hades, right, in the underworld. Now, he's rising into what looks to be a heaven. But again, for those who think we were founded on Christianity, they're going to find that heaven to be very strange, because Jesus isn't there, right? His angels, the Bible, God the Father, none of the Old Testament prophets, none of them are there, not the disciples. This is a heaven that is filled with pagan gods and demons. But it's very important the way they are portrayed, because it goes back to the Atlantean scheme. These gods are seen, depicted as working with Americans and the early founders to establish this great continent. They're the invisible force, the Atlantean force that is now working with them to make it happen. So for instance, we look up into the heavens, and here is Virgo, or Venus, who is Isis, and she is pulling the transatlantic telegraph cable. So she's working with them to establish America, right? Another scene, there's Vulcan, the Roman god of fire. And he's standing at an anvil, and behind him is the locomotive, right? So he's working as an invisible force to partner in this occult democracy to help establish this one nation under whatever God is being referred to on the Bible.
And so Ephesians 6 says we're not wrestling against flesh and blood, but against principality powers, spiritual powers in darkness, in heavenly places. So in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., what you're talking about is, rather than showing a heaven with God, Jesus Christ, the Son of God, angels and all of these things, it's mythological. It's pagan.
It's all Greco-Roman. It's all the very gods that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams and and Benjamin Franklin and other founding fathers. It's all the gods that they wanted this nation to be dedicated to. And it's richly displaying that Jupiter has favored the daring undertaking, which is on the Great Seal, Anahuac Coeptus, that the gods now are helping to establish this country. And that's the reason why all of Washington, D.C., I want to stay on the Capitol Dome for a moment, but all of Washington, the layout of the streets, the timing of the dedications of the cornerstones of the building being done when we were in an astrological alignment with Virgo. George Washington in his Masonic garb, with the all-seeing eye on his apron, dedicating the cornerstones. This was an intentional effort to win the favor of the pagan gods. That's exactly out of their belief system. Again, anybody can verify what I'm saying. It's in all of the writing of the most famous Freemasons themselves. So you're standing in the U.S. Capitol Dome. That's what you see. So the partnership is working according to Brumidi's painting. Now, right below this heaven that Washington is rising into are 72 pentagrams. We talked about the number 72 in the first part of this special series. This is a direct reference to the Cosmocrators, the fallen watcher angels that were placed over the 72 nations of the earth. But 72 pentagrams, a pentagram is used in occultism for controlling supernaturalism, right, to either bind supernaturalism or to loose supernaturalism. So again, this is Masonic, but it is also occultic. It goes into this idea that we can manipulate stuff. And by the way, the number 72 in Freemasonry also is part of what is called the Tetragrammaton, or the 72 ways that the name of God in Hebrew can be manipulated in order to create a magical construct called the Shimham Foresh, right? Again, for controlling these entities. This is deeply occultic, it's deeply Freemasonic, and anybody can verify what I'm saying. So 72 pentagrams. These form a doorway. Modern lingo, a stargate, if people want to think of it that way, that can be opened and closed. Now, this is really important because it can be opened for a dead American president. And this is where they take them when they lie in state. They take them in that room. They lie right underneath this heaven, while across town at the Herodome, the Freemasons are conducting a raising of Osiris ceremony so that the spirit can rise up in to join George Washington in the afterlife as the new Osiris. So in Osirian mythology, he's always dying and rising. He's the dying and rising god. This goes back to the Pharaoh. When the Pharaoh died, he became Osiris of the underworld. The new Pharaoh comes in. He's the son of Osiris. He's the Horus, right? So you always have constant divine representation in your leadership. All of that is recreated here in the U.S. Capitol Dome. The 72 pentagrams cause the doorway to open for his spirit to rise. But later on, we'll talk about the inauguration of a new president where the doorway is reversed and something comes back down through the dome that joins that president of the United States. We'll talk about that momentarily. Now, you get beneath the 72 pentagrams, and you're standing in the rotunda. All around the encirclement of the dome is what's called the frieze of American history. These are different scenes out of American history when different things were accomplished. But there's one that stands out as being very odd, and it is a complete recreation of the Aztec calendar stone. Now, this definitely is Freemason because Manly P. Hall wrote about how all of the most powerful occult wisdom in Freemasonry came from the red man out of Mesoamerica. So that's important that that is there. In fact, the Jesuits in New York, who were considered to be the power base of Rome in the United States in the 1800s, they financed the trip to Old Mexico with Constantino Brumidi to go there and make copious notes of the Aztec calendar stone. And on return, he went to Washington, D.C., met with Quartermaster General Montgomery C. Meigs, showed him his plan, and was immediately made the official government painter of the dome and also the wings off of the dome. And so he paints the Aztec calendar stone. In the middle of the Aztec calendar stone, the Mayan calendar stone, as some people might call it, is the strange-looking face with its tongue sticking out at the world. That is the god Tonatiuh. And that is the god in Aztec history that demanded human sacrifice. And we are talking literally hundreds of thousands of people being murdered and offered to this god who sits proudly inside the U.S. Capitol dome, sticking his tongue out at the world. You might remember in the lead up to the year 2012 and all of the New Agers, they were out there talking about the end of the Mayan calendar, the end of the world, 2012, December 23, 2012. And if you go to YouTube, you'll find me on TV, all these different shows, 2009, 2010, 2011, saying that is not. I studied the academic literature on this. I really went into a deep dive, and I said that is not what they said. They never said the world's coming to an end. They said that a time was coming when the calendar would roll over into a new golden pagan age, into a new final age. Well, but they were using the Gregorian calendar to date the end of the Mayan calendar. If you use the Julian calendar, it just rolled over in 2020 in the lead up to the alignment of Jupiter and Saturn, which created a momentary bright star in the heavens that everybody was calling the Christmas star and talking about maybe this is what heralded the birth of Jesus. No, it was an asteroid that heralded the birth of Jesus. But that aside, Jupiter and Saturn does not herald the promised son of the Bible. It heralds the promised son of the Cumae Sibyl's prophecy. Jupiter, Saturn, the return of old Saturn's reign literally happened the 21st of December, just 2 months ago, heralding the entrance into the new golden pagan age.
What do you think the significance of that? You think that we're entering now into the very end? Like leading up to the tribulation, leading up to the rapture?
My personal belief is that we definitely are. And in the future, I'll talk some more about that. I find the year 2025 to be extraordinarily insightful, but maybe that's a different message for a different time. And do we make anything out of, the Aztec calendar stone other than the fact that that's a very odd thing to have in the frieze of American history?
Extremely odd.
Because it's really more Mexican history. But to have that there is strange, but it is an occult symbol. And it does attest to some of the beliefs of the Freemasons that, this hodgepodge of beliefs, like John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, they mingle all this stuff together to create kind of their own idea. But all of it does point to the arrival. And one other thing, by the way, Tonatiuh is the god up here. The rollover of the calendar attests to a new golden pagan age, but it's also the time when the underworld god Bolanyakteku is going to rise with the giants that are bound in the underworld in fulfillment of Isaiah 13. Giants are coming to fulfill my wrath. But this also goes to the other parts of the Cumae Sibyl, a new age of men blended with the gods coming down. This is all Watcher stuff. Now, two other things very quickly. On the dome. Right outside of the rotunda is the Congressional Prayer Room. Okay, yay, Congressional Prayer Room, a Christian thing, right? Except when you walk in there, there's a giant image of George Washington on his knees praying to a god, and above his head is the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States of America. Over his head, literally the age of Horus, the all-seeing eye of Horus, over the 13-stepped uncapped pyramid, which with the Anuet Coeptus and Novus Ordo Seclorum, which are taken literally out of the prophecies of the Cumae Sibyl, the second coming of Jupiter and Apollo. Beneath his feet is the front side of the Great Seal, perhaps illustrating the foundation being laid upon an acknowledgement to the god Jupiter. Now you come back inside the rotunda, and beneath your feet is something that most people in the world don't even know. The very next floor down is called the U.S. National Crypt, and it's exactly what it sounds like. It is a crypt, and it has an empty tomb inside of it. The original story is in the late 1700s, the Freemasons built the crypt, put a tomb in there, and this is where they wanted George Washington to be buried. But Washington preferred instead to be buried in the garden of his family home. And so now you have an empty tomb that is literally laying beneath your feet. In a moment, I'll explain why this is an antichrist version, if you will, of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, an occult version of it.
You know, the word occult means secret. And as you've been talking, and you were saying in the first segment, you were talking about the 33rd degree Masons say, well, the 32nd degree Masons don't know all this stuff.
You're right.
Okay. And so the thing it made me appreciate about Christianity is it's not secret.
Right.
You know, it's simple. Jesus said, unless you converted and become like a child, you can't enter the kingdom of heaven. And so a lot of very smart people who understood a lot of these very dark, you know, complicated things came up with all this stuff. But the simple, profound power of the gospel of Jesus Christ is greater than all this stuff.
Right.
And every person has, you know, the Bible's available. It's the most popular book in the world. But when I read the Bible as a 19-year-old Christian when I first got saved, I could understand it. You know, it was something that it penetrated my life. It changed my life. So as we talk about all these things, it should give you an appreciation for the Bible and the gospel and the power of God. But these things are real.
Right.
The capital of the United States. And when you look at all of the dark things happening spiritually in America today, there is a force. Like you were talking about on the dome, the painting there are spiritual forces at work trying to guide our nation to a dark end, to a certain end. We have the ability through God to change that.
Yeah.
Okay. But if we don't, we're on a certain track. Go ahead and talk about that.
Well, we are on a certain track, and it's been changed at different times in history. Revival and Great Awakening have often changed the totalitarian ideas. The bottom line is this nation was dedicated. Manly P. Hall, one of the most prolific 33rd degree Masonic writers in American history, wrote dozens of books, gave literally thousands of presentations before packed crowds in the 1900s across America. He wrote the book called The Secret Destiny of America, in which he literally explained how Freemasonry laid out the U.S. Capitol, the Great Seal of the United States, all of it to put this nation on course for one purpose, and that is to bring about the incarnation of who we would call Antichrist.
Right.
So, first of all, the Great Seal of the United States, the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States, heralds the second coming of Apollo, who you rightly said in part one of this series is recognized by name in the New Testament, in the book of Revelation, also by Paul to the Thessalonians, recognized by name as being the entity that will be incarnate in Antichrist.
Now this parallels a lot of the Freemasonry and a lot of what you're talking about. It parallels the Bible.
It does.
It's just on a darker side.
Well, Antichrist mimics. He's
right.
Antichrist. That's what he does. He mimics everything that is Jesus. Jesus came to the world and he performed miracles. Antichrist performs miracles. He died, rose from the dead. Antichrist is healed of a deadly head wound.
Right.
So those parallels, they go on and on. So it makes sense then that a Capitol building that is dedicated to bringing about the incarnation of who we would call the man of sin is a parallel to the death, burial, and resurrection. Right. Now, in what ways? It's really profound. So you look up into the underbelly of ISIS, the U.S. Capitol dome. Washington is ascending into a heaven of pagan gods. But in the life of Christ, he died, rose from the dead, and ascended up into heaven where God is, and he's standing at the right hand of the throne of God. Beneath the apotheosis are the 72 pentagrams, representing the 72 fallen watchers. Well, Jesus confronted the 72 watchers in his life, triumphing over them. For instance, at Caesarea Philippi, he's standing at the base of Mount Hermon. You know this, right? Mount Hermon at that time was where the Hebrews believed that the gateway to Osiris, the gateway to the underworld, existed there. The gate. And Jesus says to his disciples, the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. Tells them that right there. Then he goes up onto Mount Hermon and he begins reversing what the watchers did, the 72. He begins reversing everything that happened at Mount Hermon with the 200 that descended in the days of Jared, because they cast off their heavenly bodies, according to Peter and Jude in the New Testament, quoting from the book of Enoch, right? and took on bodies of flesh. Jesus goes up onto Mount Hermon and he reverses it. He's standing there in a body of flesh when he is transfigured into his heavenly body, and he is glorified there in front of them. But then what he did gets really important. He comes down off of the mountain and he anoints 72
That's right.
disciples.
That's right.
And he sends them to take the gospel into the nations of the world to illustrate that he is taking back, right? All of these people who believe that they're in bonds and chains under the control of these 72 cosmocrators, he wants them to know, I'm here, and wherever my feet touch the ground, it becomes holy ground, right?
That's awesome.
And the 72 go out, and when they come back, it says that they rejoice that even the demons there were subject unto them through his name. Immediately he goes to Jerusalem, and a few days later he is crucified. The New Testament tells us he goes down into the underworld where he presents himself to the watchers that are down there in chains awaiting everlasting judgment. But then he does something extraordinary. He rises from the dead, right? And we learn in Revelation 1:18, he says, I am he who was dead and am alive forevermore, and I have the keys to death and to hell. That is so much more meaningful than the average person today can even start to understand, because at the time that Jesus walked the earth, the most popular doctrine on the planet was the death, burial, and resurrection of Osiris in its different forms. You could look at it as Apollo to the Greeks, but that was the most popular. He was known as the dying and rising god, and he was the god of the underworld. And Osiris was the one who had the keys to the 12 gates in Egyptian mythology to the underworld. So he let Anubis have a key. He let his wife Isis have a key to these different gateways of the underworld. Jesus utterly repudiates the idea that he's the dying and rising God. Jesus says, I am he, me. I'm the one who was dead and am alive forevermore, and I have the keys. And he literally tells us to what? To death and the grave. He uses the word Hades, which is the Greek term for Osiris.
Wow.
The Greeks called Osiris Hades. He literally is repudiating their doctrine that is literally built in stone at the U.S. Capitol Dome and on the Great Seal of the United States of America. And then, of course, they not only dealt with the 72, but beneath your feet in the rotunda is an empty tomb. He is not here, for he is risen. This is literally an antichrist repudiation of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, interpreted in an occult manner. But of course, it's also meant to be practical magic, sympathetic magic.
You were telling me earlier, we were talking about practical magic. The Washington Monument is a very occultic symbol. Okay, talk about the significance of that and the rising of Osiris ceremony and all that stuff.
Okay. Yeah, so the Washington Monument, it's the largest obelisk of its kind in the world. It's literally designed after the ancient Egyptian obelisk of Osiris, and it stands at 6,666 inches high. Just a coincidence, right? 666 inches long along each line at the base. The base actually forms what is known in antiquity as the 666 magic square. Benjamin Franklin used the 666 magic square for invoking the spirit of Apollo. It's a device meant to summon the solar deities, but in particular, the god Apollo. Inside that 666 magic square is bound a Bible inside of the U.S. Capitol Dome. The purposes of that I'll explain in a moment when we talk about the Herodome. But here's something else, and I'll just say this as delicately as I can, right? The obelisk is a representation of the phallus of the god, Osiris. If you take an anatomically correct phallus and place it over the top of the Washington Dome, 20-some yards out from the base of the dome, in what would be the testicular section of the Washington Monument, there is a hidden mystery. We are the ones who unveiled this in my documentary film, Belly of the Beast, right? We actually provided photographic proof, film of it. There is a manhole located in the testicular section of the Washington Monument. When you raise this large manhole out of the way, guess what's in the ground there? There is a hole, and inside of it is a perfect replica of the Washington Monument that is only 12 feet tall. It represents the seed of Osiris that is waiting to be born from the shaft of Osiris. It's waiting to be generated. And of course, exactly 12 feet, because 12, as you know, in both the Bible and in occultism, represents perfect government.
Right.
So it is symbolic, it is practical magic, it is meant to serve a particular purpose. Now, back to the myth of Osiris, as we pointed out in the first part of this special series, is the story of the god Set. He conspires with 72 ruffians. They capture Osiris, they murder him, chops him into 14 pieces, throws the 14 pieces into the Nile River. Isis, his sister wife, goes up and down the Nile River. She recovers 13 of the 14 pieces. The one piece she can't find is his missing male organ, which was swallowed by a fish. And so she puts his corpse back together. She creates a magic obelisk, which she affixes to his corpse in place of his phallus. And then she performs the very first raising of Osiris ceremony, calls forth the seed of Osiris up out of the underworld through the magic obelisk into her belly. She becomes impregnated and gives birth to the dying and rising God, gives birth to the son of Osiris, second coming, third coming, fourth coming, over and over, in the person of Horus, which is the eye that is hovering above the uncapped pyramid on the Great Seal of the United States. Now, so important was that story that at the inauguration of every new pharaoh in Egypt during a festival called Opet, the pharaoh would be placed on a barge and he'd be taken up the Nile River to the largest religious construct ever built, the Temple of Amun-Ra at Karnak. As he's going up the Nile, the laity are following on both sides of the Nile, and they're celebrating, and they're reenacting bits and parts of the story of the myth of Osiris and Isis. Finally, he arrives at Karnak. He's taken by the priests over into the domed temple of Isis that represents her ever-pregnant belly that is so many yards away from a giant obelisk at Karnak. He goes inside the belly of Isis. And the Egyptian magicians, now keep in mind, these guys had significant occult power during the Exodus. They're able to repeat almost all of the miracles that happened when God told Moses to go in and tell Pharaoh, let my people go. So they had astonishing occult power. These guys go into the temple with Pharaoh and they conduct the raising of Osiris ceremony. So they draw the seed of Osiris up out of the underworld through the obelisk as the Pharaoh is standing inside the domed belly of Isis looking out there at the obelisk. It magically emits the seed of Osiris into the dome of Isis. And here stands Pharaoh, and he is transmogrified. He went into the temple. He was a man. He comes out of the temple. He is a god. He is the Osiris. He is the resurrected deity. And all of Egypt celebrates because now they have divine representation. Now, fast forward to our present day. And at the inauguration of every American president.
This is fascinating.
Yeah. As he is standing inside the U.S. Capitol dome, beneath the magic gateway, the belly of Isis, looking out at the obelisk in the Washington Mall, the largest of its kind ever built. Guess what's going on 13, there's that number again, blocks away from the White House on the corner of 16th Street at the Herodome, the headquarters of Scottish Rite Freemasonry. The modern Egyptian magicians, at exactly the moment the president is being inaugurated, they are conducting the raising of Osiris ceremony. And by the way, they repeat in that temple room is all the symbolism that is in the obelisk in the mall, meaning that there is a holy table. In the same way that a Bible is bound in the 666 magic square of the Washington Monument, they have a table, and all the holy books of the world. They have a King James version of the Bible. They have the Gita, the Bhagavad, or whatever it's called, Gita, the Hindu holy scriptures, the Book of Mormon. They have all of those on this altar, right above which is a 666 magic binding square in the skylight that again summons the spirit of Apollo to dominate all other religious influences because they are looking forward to the day when the dreams of President Roosevelt, the dreams of Henry Wallace and Thomas Jefferson and all the other mystically minded will finally come to pass, and a sitting U.S. president will become the Osiris. So they're conducting the raising of Osiris. The president's in the dome. He's looking out at the obelisk. The seed of Osiris comes up through the obelisk, magically admits into the temple, the Washington Dome, and he is inaugurated. Another American term here, inauguration. But this is actually derived from the ancient Roman augurs in Augur 8, the ancient Roman augurs who would tell you whether Jupiter approves your daring undertaking. Even that term, the inauguration of the American president, is taken from these cosmological beliefs.
Absolutely fascinating. Satan is a cheap substitute for what God is doing, all of the plans that the devil has in America. And you hear these fascinating details about Washington, D.C. and all that's going on. God's plan is the real plan. The death, resurrection of Jesus Christ. That's what makes us saved. That's what gives us eternal life. That's what makes our lives whole. And so all of these things that are being done to try to resurrect Osiris and all these other things, it's just a cheap substitute for what we already have in Jesus Christ. Now, Dr. Warren, let's talk about just a couple more things. We're just about out of time. Anything else you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think you said something very important in the first episode of this special series. The Bible actually confirms that the prophecy on the Great Seal of the United States is going to come to pass.
That's right.
Now, that's a daring statement.
Yes.
Except Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Thessalonica, and he said the Antichrist, he said, will be the son of perdition. And the Greek word there, perdition, is Apollo.
That's right.
He'll be the son of Apollo. Revelation 17:8. And the beast will rise up out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. Apollo.
Right.
So the Bible actually confirms that this prophecy is going to happen, but it's not going to be the second coming of Jesus Christ.
That's right.
This is a false Christ, a false Messiah who will deceive the world and lead them into a new golden pagan age. One other final thought. So we know Antichrist is coming, and he will be a political figure, but the Bible also talks about a false prophet who will lead the world's religious community into accepting this man.
Right.
So you go to the largest Christian institution in the world, in Rome, and I'm not taking a shot at Catholicism here. I'm talking about symbols.
Right.
Out in the middle of St. Peter's Square.
Yep. I was there 2 years ago.
Is an Egyptian
obelisk.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And not just any obelisk, 330-ton obelisk that was cut from a single slab of red granite.
Huge.
And dedicated to be the shaft of Osiris in the ancient city of Heliopolis, what the Bible calls the city of On.
Yeah.
It was removed from there by the Caesar of Rome and placed at the spine of the circus so that its excited presence could watch over the martyrdom of early Christians. Later, Pope Sixtus removed it from there and put it where it stands today in the middle of St. Peter's Square, where it too faces a dome.
That's right.
And when you go inside the Sistine Chapel, what do you see? Among the famous paintings of Michelangelo in all of her glory, the Cumae Sibyl, whose prophecy is on the Great Seal of the United States, who most famously predicted the second coming of the god Apollo. So in both of these most powerful political center in the world, most powerful religious center in the world, you literally have the utilities in place to bring about the incarnation of what the Bible calls arrival of Antichrist.
Dr. Warren, this has been fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you for all your study. Thank you for being with us. And so it's important to remember that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and rulers in darkness. This is why through Christ, we are the salt and the light. We're commanded to exercise his authority and take dominion for the kingdom of God. Imagine if we did that in government, in entertainment, in industry, in business, manufacturing, but being the light starts right where you are. You carry the kingdom in you and Christ in your heart, and the gates of hell will not stand against you. We are reminded through this special of what the devil is planning. But I'll tell you, God has bigger plans. And he who is in us is greater than he who is in the world. And as believers, we have the ability to take the authority of Jesus and to stand up and to make a difference in the world. And there has never been a time as dark as this, and there's never been a time as important as this for believers to stand up and stand for the truth. We hope that you have enjoyed these two special programs that we've done. And so once again, thanks, Dr. Horn, for being with us. God bless you. Thanks for being with us.